Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for letting me have a conversation with you. I see that it's a consultation. I'm not really sure you need a consultation so much as a conversation. It's always a nice thing to have. You know your customers best, so you probably know them better than I do and the staff that you work with. So a conversation is always good to make individuals think a little bit more as well. So thank you very much for inviting me up to northern New York State. I am not completely unfamiliar with New York State. I am more than just, a city guy here in Queens Library. So I have my undergraduate degree from Albany, the great city of Albany. And I got my MLS from Buffalo. And I always like to march out my non-downstate credentials by saying that I married a Rochester girl. So thank you very much. I have been with the Queens Library for 25 years. I started off as a library trainee. I was a teen librarian, an assistant manager at one of our small places, an assistant manager of one of our big places, a manager in 2 locations. For 7 years, I was the coordinator for young adult services here at Queens Library, working with our age level librarians and with our other coordinators around New York State. And for the last 10 years, I've been working in our branch administration, a couple of positions running the central library, and then director of our community libraries, and for the last 2.5 years, the chief librarian at the Queens Library. So I tell new staff when I go through this that I don't say that to brag in any way, but just to show what a large system has many different opportunities to provide within one big system where, for people who work in smaller libraries, sometimes they don't see those avenues right in front of them. And so you have to oftentimes go out and find those avenues instead of them being right here. The Queens Library has been around for over 120 years, serving the good people, 2.3 million people of Queens. We have 65 locations. Oh, wait, I could do something. So I have a prop. Hey, that's cool. Okay, it probably looks backwards to you, but at least it shows you what Queens looks like. And while you might not make out everything, we have 65 locations that we name for the location. So each of these locations, we really treat them as unique because they have different communities. As you likely know, the Queens Library has 50% of its population was born outside the United States from over 100 different countries, speaking 100 different languages. When I say that in a breath, it's a little heavy. However, it is absolutely true that because of the incredible diversity from so many different places, that is the thing that gives Queens Library and Queens County its great strength, is that there is no dominant culture. I know that people are learning from other people, and people are used to dealing with people that are different than them. That helps a great deal when dealing with customers and fellow staff members that are also different than you are. And so that does lend itself. Does it bring, certain challenges sometimes? Not everyone wants everything different. That is true, but it at least provides our staff and our customers with a base of that my neighbor might not look or do things that are what I do and my family does. So short of that, I oversee the managers, our directors, the programs that we provide. We had 1.5 million people attend programs for us last year. And our circulation was about 13 million and the gate count of about 11 million. That's great. And you talk about big numbers like that. I usually like to, especially with other professionals, remind them of what they already know. It's great to talk about, hey, we have 1 million people that use the library every year. But as I told you, we have 2.3 million people in Queens. So not even half the amount of people that really could use the public library are doing so. And so No matter how big the system, how big the small the system, there are lots of people that you know that need the library that are not using it, and that is an ongoing challenge to be able to bring new people into the library. And that's what we're trying to do all the time with the limited resources that we all have in libraries. And so the least we can do is try to do things for free, like help each other and share ideas. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here. So that's my little intro. Thank you. Now I can drink my coffee.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was a lot, but it really kind of brings home the fact that we're all here to do the same thing. So, okay, so let's get started with some questions, and these are in order of how I share them with you. And the first question, how do I advocate for going fine-free and raising checkout limits?
How do I advocate for going fine-free and increasing checkout limits? Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm the best person for talk about going fine-free. My library is not doing it. I would think that I am fine for going fine-free. I think it's I think the idea is good. However, as you likely know, someone has to pay for that. So we bring in, I don't know, a few hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines that kids and teenagers give us. That stinks. I don't want to take their money. However, if we don't have that, I'm buying approximately a few $100,000 less materials. So it really depends on where you're getting your funding. And so if you're getting your funding from a municipality and they want to go with this idea too, they're ultimately the ones that have to pay for it. The Queens Library is a not-for-profit organization, is not going to get extra money from the city unless the city also wants to make this happen and take credit for it. So if it is something you really want to do, who's giving you the money to cover this? Now, I know Patricia in Rochester, she could probably talk about this, and Scott in Albany can talk about this really well because they've done it. I know that I believe in Rochester, they got a little extra money, but they basically phased it in over a few years and, and bit the bullet a little bit. As for raising checkout limits, ours is 50 at Queens. That seems like enough. There are very few times people need more than that. I would say if you increase your checkout limits or go fine-free, two things are going to happen. More people are going to check out material, which is great. And so you therefore have to buy more material. So nothing is free. So you give up fines and now you don't have that revenue and you have a greater pressure on your collection. It's the same thing with checkout limits. If you let people take out 20 books, they'll take out 20 and they'll keep them for 3 weeks or whatever your loan is. If you give them 50, they'll take out 50 and keep them for 3 weeks. But advocating it in terms of that is figuring out who the decision makers are and convincing them that it's a good idea.
Great, thank you for that. I know that some of the libraries in our area are fine-free, including my own library, Potsdam Public. And maybe if Annie Chase is on the line, so maybe later if she wants to talk about her experience, and not to put you on the spot, Annie, but maybe later if you want to, you can talk about it.
Yeah, because I'd be curious to know how you were able to, deal with less money, less revenue.
Okay. So later, Annie, if you want to hop on, if we get through our questions, that would be awesome. So our next question is records retention. What types of records need to be kept and for how long? Are there different rules for different types of libraries?
So I can't answer really the second one. In fact, I think there are probably different rules for different libraries, even if they're the same type. So there are two questions. My main focus at the Queens Library is public service. So what type of records do I want to keep and for how long is a lot different question than what the legal department and what human resources wants to keep and for how long. That is usually much more important because they're dealing with legal issues. So I would start from the idea of what am I forced to keep? I would start, in that direction. What am I forced to keep? What are those records? I don't know. I would ask my HR department, my legal department, what are these are what, we produce. What needs to be kept? Now, we did a whole audit of records, but we did it not for how long they need to be kept, but as part of a privacy audit of what are we holding on and for how long. And I think many of you are probably experiencing that too. I'm one to keep things as short amount of time as possible. People say, well, we always kept those incident reports indefinitely. But my favorite term is indefinitely. Now, when your library's been around for 75 years, what does that even mean, indefinitely? These people are dead that, yelled at the library 10 years ago. And so, I think it's important to have an idea of what you need to keep, but I would very much involve other people, find out what the legal requirement is, and really ask yourself, why do I need this? And do I need it here? Or if it is a legal thing that I have to retain, can I just put it at some self-storage place for that one time every 10 years that I need to grab something from a box?
Great, thank you, Nick. And if anyone has any follow-up questions as we go along, feel free to chat them in the chat box because we want to make sure we're getting to everything that everyone wants. So the next question is, how can I make a positive change to the summer reading program when a few people resist change and overcoming resistance to change more generally? And I think that's pretty universal.
Yeah, that's the old resisting change. So I'm going to step back from this question just a little bit. So I don't know who's asking this question, so that's even better. And so I come with no subjectivity to it. But anytime that change is going to be done, what I'm seeing here is a positive change. So someone has self-described what they want to do as positive and describing other people as the resistors. So the question I would ask is, why does a change have to be made? And there could be very good reasons for that. And why are the people resisting? So when I first read this question a few days ago, I thought of, and this very well might not be the case here, I thought about a new person coming in to a library, a new director, a new manager, whoever it is, a new supervisor coming in and saying, I have great ideas for your summer reading that I know you've been doing pretty well for the last 15 years. And the kids love you, but we're going to do something completely different this year. Well, if I was that librarian who'd been there 15 years and thought I was doing a good program, I'd be thrown off. And I would definitely think that this is not going to be a positive change. Anytime there needs to be change, one has to ask, what is that change that has to be done? And who needs to be involved in part of that decision? So in my example, if I had said, listen, let me bring in my children's librarians to talk about summer reading, what is it you want to see? And if the answer is, I want to see more young people participating, now that's the conversation. What do we have to change in order to make more people to participate? And right away, that's a much different conversation than, an I person wanting to make change, and it's the they that are resisting. So I guess I would, take a step back on what is the goal that's trying to be accomplished. And then really that leads right into the second question, doesn't it? Is that overcoming resistance to change. Change sucks, okay? I hate change. I'm over here, I would like to do the exact same thing for the next 10 years that will lead me right to my state pension, okay? That is very unlikely to happen, okay? And I think when you have, I think it's the responsibility of managers, directors, to really remind their staff that, we are in a library. We are really where change happens. And, part of our, even at a small, library, there's going to be, change both in trends, change in technology, and not everyone has to be a change agent, but it's a conversation that needs to be going on. So people are resistant to change because why? They're scared. They're scared that they're not going to feel as competent. They're scared that your technology, your self-check machine is going to put me out of business, I'm going to get fired. People are scared of change. And I think when you involve them in it and talk to them through it and make them part of the solution, oftentimes you at least start the process of overcoming that resistance.
Great, thank you, Nick. That is good advice, and it applies to life too, I think, but not to get too deep. It's, you know,
You're
too early for that.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay, the next one we have is, how do I hold my colleagues more accountable for their work?
I love getting questions where I don't know who's asking, because my first thought is, oh, this is a manager needing to get their staff in check, and then sometimes what I find is I have librarians that come up to me and say, I wish my colleagues would work better or work harder. So, oftentimes if it's your colleagues, it's the person that works next to you, and this is very frustrating because if you have a very high work ethic and you care about the job that you do, you're going to, bust it all the time. And there are various reasons why, your colleague, or you might perceive your colleague not being as accountable to their work. So I think a lot of this goes back to what are the standards for the job? And sadly, what we might find is that that person that we're complaining about, our colleague next to us, is actually doing their job just fine according to the standards that have been set by their supervisor. You might be the one that's overachieving and it's frustrating you. Or anytime someone steps up to the desk, you're the one that says, oh, may I help you? And they sit back and don't help anybody or wait. So I think the question in general, and maybe this is a one-on-one question with, if you share the same supervisor, I think the question for the supervisor is, what are your expectations for this position? What are your expectations what are my standards of performance? Because at least if you don't want to be disrespectful for your supervisor and say, how come you let them get away with everything and I have to bust my ass all the time? That will not lead to positive change. That will add to resistance, as we just discussed before. So, but asking, your supervisor, what are you looking for in the people that are sitting here? And then you're thinking to yourself, because if you think about this a little bit more, you'll see that the person sitting next to me does not meet the standards that they're doing. So I'm not sure how you hold them more accountable other than setting a good example and reminding your supervisor, what's expected from the position. I think it's really tough, whether it's a big place or a small place, to be known as the person that rats out your colleagues because they don't work as hard as you do. I think that's something that that is experienced in many places other than libraries, about being frustrated because, because you're the one that's, that has a higher work ethic, or quite honestly, more prepared for the job than they are.
Can I follow up to that one?
Yes. Can I get more coffee while you follow up?
Sure.
Excellent.
That one gets a little tricky. I think sometimes school librarians feel, I think sometimes finger pointing goes on in school libraries, and it doesn't really create a good culture when that goes on in school libraries. And sometimes finger pointing goes on, which is never a good way to work. But sometimes the supervisors in a school library environment, well, they're almost never school librarians, so that can be a little tricky.
Yep.
So what recommendations do you have in a school library situation when the supervisors are often principals and they're not a school librarian?
Yeah, excellent question. And oftentimes, if there is a school media specialist, they're the only ones in the building, too. It's kind of a lonely, I admire the school librarian, the school media specialist, because they're the only one in the building. They have no librarian colleagues. Sometimes their colleagues, many times, might be out of the building. But I think I would go back to what I did say before. I would, have a formalized conversation with the principal, and maybe that's once at the beginning of the month or at the beginning of the year. I know they're busy. I got it. I know they have 100 emails. I know they're very busy. But I also know they want to see success. And so, it really does, rely on the principal to set the tone. But I think the conversation needs to be, I don't want to say forced, but I think a formalized conversation needs to happen at some point during the year that says, Miss Principal, Mr. Principal, what is it that you want to see from your school library? And before you answer that, that's the question, but before you answer that, let me tell you what is possible. Let me tell you what the best school library interaction looks like, because you can find this out from your colleagues. You know what it looks like when it works. In a perfect setting, I'm going to find out information from teachers beforehand. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to make their job better. And therefore, I have this study right here that says a positive school library produces more positive results for kids and teachers. I mean, we have these things that we can show. Now, if you're not the school media specialist and you're, it's a teacher that's covering the library, I think that's the advocate that you need to get to say, listen, having done this in the library, this is what I've seen as possible. But it really does take a point person to say, this is not just a place where someone with a master's degree sits with lots of books. This is the centralized place where learning and literacy and information studies takes place. If your principal or teachers are caring about privacy, where else can they learn it other than here? If they need information on primary sources, where are they going to learn that other than here? I think it's a matter of forcing the elevation of the school library and then trying to get your number one benefactor, which is the principal, to really understand that they have something that's really special in their school. That's very difficult, though, Megan. Oftentimes that's a relationship that cannot happen. Like, I'm the new person. I would like a formalized meeting with the principal now to tell them of how they should be doing how this library could be working better. That is the relationship that takes place over time, and sometimes informally in the halls. I think everyone, regardless of what you're pitching, needs that 30 seconds so that when you are speaking with somebody, you're not going to come across as a curmudgeon. You're going to give them, whoever it is, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a principal, whether it's a director, it's like, you know what? Here's my 30-second pitch for something that will help you and help the library, period.
Yes, thank you, Megan. That was a really great follow-up to that question. And I have a follow-up too. In a past library job in a different state, in a different time, I had a colleague who was it was a part-time reference assistant. It was like 20 hours a week, but she would stay after like an hour or two every night working, putting together displays and things. What is the culture, or what is the mentality for administrators, like for when people do above and beyond the work that they should be doing, like as far as, like, what does that sort of mean for other workers?
Yep. I'm going to tell a story that a supervisor told me about his experience in another state. It was Texas, his state. And so he was working at the Dallas Library. And at the Dallas Library, there was this nice woman that worked there, and her job was a 9-to-5 job. And at 8:30 in the morning, as people came in, they would say, hello, whatever her name was, and she would say hi. And they always said the same thing. Isn't it great that she's starts at 8:30. She loves her job, and she loved the Dallas Public Library. Loved her job, you know, put in her time. After 25 years, you know, people were sad to see her go. She had her exit interview, and she said, I loved my job. I really don't want to leave, but it's time. I would come in a half an hour early every day, and my colleagues were, and they were like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? You come in a half an hour every day early? Does your supervisor know? Well, yeah, they say good morning to me every morning. Does anybody, oh, everyone loves it, everyone. So what ended up happening is her supervisor, you know, the state pension realized that the supervisor was probably, even though everyone was happy, the supervisor in essence and the Dallas Public Library were taking advantage of this employee. And so she got back pay for a half an hour every day for 25 years. That's a lot of back pay. That would ruin lots of our libraries here, okay? And so when we think someone's doing something nice, or they're trying to go above and beyond, it is, you know, even though I see it, and even though I've done it, I've worked beyond my 35, 40 hours. But as a supervisor, when I see it, I have to stop it. I'm sorry, you know, it's like, but I don't have time in my day to do everything I need to do. And it's up to the supervisor to really figure out, I understand that, let's figure out how we can, you know, you can only be here for X number of times. Let's respect the work that you do and maximize the work that you do during that time. But quite honestly, we're here to work, we're not here to volunteer. And, you know, and as I say that, I know that there are teachers across the country and librarians who work in schools that, are you kidding me? Like, of course we work beyond the school day. I think that's a little different. It really depends on what the person's job is. If they are a 9-to-5 person and they're coming in at 8:30 because they need to catch up on their work, then it's up to the supervisor to really see that this job is more than, it may be more than one person's job, or it may be how they're working during the 9-to-5 otherwise, but it's more than just, hey, great, thanks for volunteering an extra hour every day. There's a little bit more that goes into it, and we really don't want to take advantage of people who are giving the extra time. So I know that's kind of a weird way and long way to answer that, and you know, any go-getter has been that person. So, but I guess the thing is, you don't want to take advantage of, especially the good people that work.
Thank you, Nick. Let's go to the next question. That was a really good one. How do I balance being anti-censorship with students checking out titles that are age appropriate? This discussion would be different in different library environments. For sure. So, you know, if you're in a school, that is a completely different environment than the public library. I have never worked for pay at a school library, and I know that this is definitely something that needs to be, that's addressed all the time at the school library. So, you know, I saw this question too, and you know, when we say censorship, at different, even at different schools, at different libraries, at different places in the country, that what is censored is different. As usual, I'm going to take an even step back and say, we librarians censor things all the time. We censor them by not buying them for our collection in the first place. So by the time we've already set up a collection, we've already have influence over what's in that collection. So I don't think we necessarily have to start from the position of, I am super anti-censorship, because that's not necessarily the case. So if we're talking about a school, then there's a collection development policy, correct? Of course there is, right? That's how we buy things for schools. And so does everything we buy fit into that collection development policy? And if it does, then we have a leg to stand on when a teacher, principal, probably parent, comes to us and say, why is this in your library? Why did my kid have the ability to check this out? Then you have real answers that you can work with the parent on.
At a public library, it might be a little different too, because oftentimes we'll have parents sign when if it's underage, and we at the Queens Library consider underage to be 12. But anytime below that, a parent can sign the form that says, my kid can take out any book in this library. If we can grant open access to the library, it's the parent that's making that decision. And in the end, that is who should be making the decisions of what children and families should be reading, is a conversation with the parents. We make it very difficult when we don't tell the parents what's on the kid's card because of privacy. So I know that there are lots of things that we do that do not make it easy to actually have that conversation. So it's, in terms of balancing it, I think you have to stand on a firm collection development policy, buy to that policy, find out, what is even considered something that might be, controversial in your community, and address it, by saying, listen, this is controversial, therefore we want to have all points of view on a certain issue. And, at some point we need to stand up and be that person that says, listen, I know people, some people might not agree with this, but this is, what is, at least ideally what is core to our profession. But, I deal with this a lot of times when it comes to the computer. So don't I have the right to view porn in the library? That comes up. Maybe not in schools, but certainly in public libraries. And my answer is, of course you have the right to view porn in the library. You could do it right now. You could take out your nice little Apple phone, your iPhone, and start, looking, and no one's gonna bother you when you're like this, provided that your behavior is appropriate. However, if you have a computer screen like we have here, and I have kids walking behind me in the library, then aren't I responsible for what's on this screen here? And if I'm showing other people something that kids would find that comes across as that the staff finds violating, that kids find violating, that other customers do, then that's a different situation. You can look at certain things in the library, you can't show them to other people. Is that in the ALA Code of Conduct Bill of Rights? It is not, okay? It is definitely something that I have, and our library has had to figure out, how do we balance these things? And whether it's censorship, whether it's privacy, whether it's, the rights to view, I think all of us have to figure out, how we balance that in our communities while still being true to not being censors, not being anti-privacy, and providing as much open access as possible.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Always the fun conversation when patrons are watching porn in public computers.
Well, and I think we need to be prepared in the public library for, don't I have the right to do this? And the short answer I give is yes, but you don't have the right to show it to other people. You can use our Wi-Fi all you want to do whatever you want, but it's your behavior and what you're showing and what's available to other people that is problematic, not what you are looking at. And I think it's important to make that definition.
Yes, thank you. Our next question, how can I improve my patron code of conduct?
I saw this too, and I was like, what the hell are your patrons doing that you need to improve your conduct? We actually updated our code of conduct a couple of years ago, just to, really just change a little language and to, quite honestly, allow a few more things. So where it said, no eating in the library. Well, yes and no, right? So, except in designated areas. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility. But I want to go back to what needs to be improved? Now, you don't have to be the person that asked this question, but are we having more fights that we need to be more codified? Are we having, like, are we having people that smell in our library, regardless of, you know, their housing situation? Because, of course, we don't know someone's housing situation when they walk in, regardless of how they look. And I say this to my customers and our staff all the time. Homeless people are coming into the library and they smell. Well, how do you know they're home? Well, they smell. I said, I know a lot of people who have homes that smell, okay? And so if it's a code of conduct for, you know, to make sure that, that everyone has a certain level of decorum, I think that's important. The key thing is to be able to implement it fairly. So what would need, I'd like to throw this open, and again, you don't have to be the person that asked, but what kind of things need to be improved on a code of conduct in general? So I said that you might have, you know, your customers and your staff might be perceiving that there are too many people that are just hanging out, and I'm trying to think of something that's bad. That they're bringing in their food. Okay, and it's really smelly because they're bringing in pizza, not just coffee. In that case, you have to say, you know, food only in designated areas. Or you might say, hey, no food allowed, period. If you do that, you cannot let people bring in coffee, because then it looks like you're not following your own code of conduct. So if you could say, hey, no food except for your warm beverage, it'll make people laugh, but it will also be, you know, true to what you're trying to accomplish. But what would someone be trying to accomplish on a code of conduct? I'm actually, while we're doing this, I'm going to try to find mine.
Yeah, I was just looking on your site, Nick, to see it, but.
Because I have it as a PDF too, so I could even share it.
Oh. Yeah, I was gonna link it out.
All right, I have to get off this screen. So. There we go. So do I have the code of conduct? Rules and requirement, here we go. Here we go. Let me see. I'm gonna move it here so that, move it here. So I will share ours with you. Okay. So, Queens Library aims to provide a positive atmosphere. That sounds good. Customers who violate it will be asked to leave the premises. Now, we are a not-for-profit organization. We are not a private business. When we call the cops, people do not get arrested. When you call the cops at Starbucks, someone can get arrested for trespassing, okay? When we call the authorities because someone is not following our rules, they are often asked just to leave the premises. I say that because that takes a great burden off of us of, you know, with our staff having to figure out at what level do I want this person arrested. That is usually not what happens when we call the authorities, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Library customers are expected to maintain acceptable standards of personal hygiene. Customers with unpleasant body odor or vermin-infested clothing. You have bed bugs at your library? Don't answer, I don't want to know. But it does happen, of course. You cannot be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Shirts and shoes required. We may ask to inspect your belongings. Animals only permitted to assist persons with disabilities. That's a good one, by the way. Because, you know, now someone comes in with a service animal, or I shouldn't say that. They come in with an animal, and it's their ferret, right? And they say, this is my service animal. And so we can't say, according to law, no, it's not. Get that ferret out of here. We need to say, I think there are 3 questions. Someone might be able to even help me with this. Is this your animal? What service is this animal providing? Are you in control of your animal? Other than that, we have to believe people. We have more dogs in these libraries now than I've ever seen, okay? So in some ways, that's a good thing. In some ways, it's another challenge. I saw the comment that came in, and I will forward this somehow to this group. Can I do that now, Christy?
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. In the chat, you can put a hyperlink in there.
All right, let's see if I can. Can I put a
And Annie Chase at Potsdam said that they improved theirs as well, and I asked if she could provide the link. And then Michelle Young, who's the director at Clarkson University Libraries, asked if any academic libraries have a patron code of conduct, because she hasn't seen any. So if you know of anything, let us know, everyone.
And I think, as, it's not just Queens that deals with a diverse, clientele and people whose language is not English. And so I think signage in terms of acceptability is also extremely important as well. So I cannot get this PDF into it. I'm going to try to find the hyperlink to it and send you that. If I don't send it before this session, I will send it to you directly and you can share it, okay?
Great, thank you so much. We'll definitely do that. And I think what I find most helpful is looking at a bunch of different policies and just getting a feel for what maybe you're forgetting or what might work for your location or things like that. So I think, yeah, borrowing and perusing other policies are great. So the next question we have, how do I deal with a manager who doesn't manage?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to cut and paste at the same time. So how do I deal with a manager who doesn't manage? I have said that so many times as a frontline staff member thinking I could do a better job than my boss. I get, well, again, what is, is this true? I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. Is the person not managing, or are they not managing to the questioner's ideal? So what I would say is I would go back to the same thing that we talked about, standards. And this is tricky because you're working from here and you're trying to manage, manage up, which I'm a big fan of managing up. Sort of helping your manager be able to manage down. But how do you deal with a manager who doesn't manage? So ultimately, step 4 or 5 is to go to that person's supervisor, because there is now a real problem that's taking place. I do not recommend that as your first line. And the thing is, whether you can have a conversation with this person. I mean, are they not managing because they can't put a schedule together? Is it really something that's affecting the day-to-day? Is this a dialogue that you can have with the manager that says, hey, how can I help you? Or is this someone who's like, no, quite honestly, they're yelling all the time. They don't know how to say thank you. They are causing major chaos in our workplace. So, once you've tried to have a dialogue, you try to defer to the authority, because, we should all start off with the idea that the manager is probably seeing a bigger picture than we are. However, the question is, are they not managing is it a performance issue or is it a behavior issue? And oftentimes, any situation I try to put into one of those categories. They manage fine, but they're rude and offensive. And quite honestly, I feel like I am being, I'm being bullied, just for when I do one thing wrong. Because there could be a point where, not managing correctly is actually doing something HR wrong. So that's important to keep in mind. If they're not managing because, they just don't know their job very well, ideally that will become self-evident if their supervisor is on site. If they're not, then that's even more of a difficult situation. I really haven't helped this question at all. I'm aware of that because this is much trickier. I mean, if I was having problems with my boss, where do you go from there? And I think, if it's a performance one can step up and say, how can I help you in this situation? How can I take on some more responsibility? Maybe I'll do the schedule because in the back of your mind, like, you can't do this at all. So I'll step up and do this and get a little extra practice on this. Although you can take another attitude on this and say, listen, you're getting paid the big bucks to do this and you are failing, okay? And some people need to fail, dare I say. There's a reason that there are probationary periods for everybody, because some people are in a position that they just cannot do. And no one wants to think that about themselves. And again, when you get to step 4 or 5 and you need to somehow be a little bit more frank with this person's boss, always be respectful, not complain, and think how it affects that person's supervisor, not how it necessarily affects you. Although, again, if you're dealing with somebody that's actually doing, is bullying, is not treating people equally, is not respectful in the workplace, and I'm hoping that you have a respectful workplace policies, then that is a much bigger issue, and HR should be involved with that. So the question is, what isn't your manager managing, and how aren't they doing it?
And I know that some, I guess, public libraries and maybe others have like a reverse evaluation where employees could rate their manager, like via the board or something like that. So maybe that's something you could advocate for too.
That's an excellent idea.
It's just a manner of trying to broach the subject and put it into a good, like how we talked about change before, like make the case for yourself or for your institution.
Yeah, I would always be respectful and always look at, because of this ineffectual manager, this is not getting done. Like look at what is not happening, as opposed to, they're not very nice, or they don't know what they're doing. Be more specific. If I'm going to hear somebody talk about their manager and they're approaching me, I don't want someone to come to me and say, well, that they don't do their job well. That doesn't help me. You haven't helped me at all. Let's talk about it. The schedule is wrong, and so it's causing confusion, and that confusion leads to the desk not being covered some points during the day. If I hear that, I'm going to take action right away. There's a difference between those two things.
Yes. Okay, so we're on to our last question. How do I advocate for professional development with my library board or school administration?
Okay. Actually, in some ways, this has become a little bit easier, right? Because the state is saying you better, for new librarians, you better have 60 hours every 5 years, or else we're not going to recertify you, right? Correct? Yes. So in the last few years, people who have gotten their MLS need to have professional development done 60 hours in a 5-year period. That's 12 hours. 12 hours a year, 1 hour a month, which is not a lot. But it does show the need for a library board or school administrator is responsible for making sure that their staff retains their professional certification. So I would fall back on that right away and say, to somebody, as you know, I have to have I have to maintain my certification. Teachers do this all the time. We understand that. We understand if an EMT needs to be recertified, it's the same idea. And so, you know, going to your library board or your school administrator and saying, well, as you know, I need to, you know, keep my certification. In order to do that, I have identified these professional opportunities. So you're going to them and saying why they need to care, which is the first thing, and then saying, and these are my suggestions. All I need you to do is say, okay. That's a lot easier than saying, I want to go to Seattle for ALA. It's good for me. I'll get some professional development. If I hear that, I'm hearing I want to go on a holiday. Okay? I'm not hearing professional development first. So the conversation is, it's mandatory to get professional development to maintain certification. And even if you've had it for more than the 5-6 years that it's been mandated, I think what the state is saying is, listen, the state understands that professionals in general need to be, you know, maintain their certification. Library profession is changing all the time. In order to be the best employee for you, I need to be up to date in developments. This is what I am advocating. This is what I suggest. I've identified these things in Albany. I've identified this conference that, you know, that is taking place, you know, somewhere else. Come up with the reason, come up with some options, come up with what happens when you're not in the building. I've already spoken to my colleague and I'm willing to work extra Saturdays so that I can go away for 3 days. Can I have the excuse time? Can I have the registration? You know, reason, ideas, you've come up with a solution, and then make your ask.
Great. We had a couple actually come in, so we have like 2 more. Let me double check. Is that cool, Nick? Do you have a little more time here?
Absolutely. This is what I'm here for. This is fun.
Great. Okay, one question that came in recently. How to work through issues with staff when they have different philosophies about library service?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I think it's great that librarians would even say, I have a philosophy on library service. Because right away, and anyone who says that should be complimented, because what they're saying is, I have thought about what we do. I think it's important, and this is how I think it needs to be presented. And it needs to be, you know, we need to provide that service. Now, I have my own philosophy. I'm hoping that all of you do as well. That being said, I work for an organization that I have voluntarily decided to work for that also, as an organization, has a philosophy, has other people here whose ideas of what library service is also included in that. I will tell you that our library is run by a president and CEO who does not have a library degree, but has been has advocated for libraries for a long time, and in my opinion, does a very good job of that. But you might also have people who, you know, are making decisions about what library service is, who don't know too much about libraries. And so it's all of our responsibility to make sure that philosophy and what we're seeing is ongoing in a conversation. I think the fine free thing is great. We would have talked about that 10 years ago, and you would have been thrown out of the room. Now it's part of, you know, it's part of the trend in libraries. Anybody who doesn't know trends in libraries needs to know, hey, this is happening. This is where it happened in Rochester. This is how successful they were. So, you know, being able to advocate for, to be able to profess how you feel means that you can have influence on how your library's philosophy is. That being said, if you really, you know, feel like, you know what, my library, I don't really, you know, I don't believe that what my library is doing. They thwart kids all the time from getting access to material. I don't philosophize. I work in a private library where they make their own rules. It goes against a lot of my own personal code of ethics. Then at some point, you have to determine, can I work here? Which is a very serious thing to start to think about. But quite honestly, you come in with your personal philosophy. On some level, it has to match the philosophy of where you're working. I don't always agree with my boss. You know, my staff doesn't always agree with me, but we agree enough to be able to respectfully pass on that, hey, this is what the library, the organization believes. And while we all might come at it differently, this is what we think. If you don't believe that, then quite honestly, then it, you know, this might be something that, you know, you have to address personally about, you know, where you're spending your professional time.
Great, thank you, Nick. And we had one more come in. This is a big one, and I updated the presentation just now so you can have a visual. How to impel staff toward professional, constructive communication, even or especially when staff are upset or angry. And then they add a sub note. Everyone has such different communication habits and patterns, but some are destructive. How can a manager curtail harmful practices, losses of temper, gossip, suffering in silence, and promote useful, healthier modes of communication or confrontation?
I think it's an excellent question, because this just gets to the core way of how do we communicate with other people. And as we all come from different backgrounds and increasingly different places, literally different places in the world, we communicate differently. I interrupt people all the time. When I'm talking with people from New York, the conversation moves forward. When I talk to people from other parts, they're like, that man is rude. And you know what? They're right. When I am interacting with them, I guess I am being rude. And I personally need to understand who the person I'm talking to is. This did not happen, you know, I did not know that when I was 25 years old. That is something that, you know, in talking to people, I came to understand not everyone communicates the same. And so, you know, when I'm talking, you know, when someone's talking to me and their face is right here in front of me, I cannot assume that they are being aggressive. I need to probably assume that they have a different definition of what space is and privacy of space. We come from many, many different places. And I know people that say, I'm not yelling, this is how I talk. And I'm like, that sounds like yelling to me, you know? And I think most people, vast majority of people, when they communicate with other people, want to do it in a respectful way. They're not coming at it to try to bully or be angry or make the person upset. They are communicating probably in the best way they know how. That being said, I just came from a training a couple of months ago on implicit bias. And, you know, my favorite line is when people say, I'm not biased, I'm not racist. I'm like, you are in America. We only try to, you know, separate people and make people different. And, you know, we are not the best at, you know, having one form of communication for everybody. That being said, there are specific trainings of how to communicate in the workforce. And so there needs to be a certain level of common way of speaking, that while you speak to your friends and family a certain way, when we are here, we are going to, you know, be respectful. We're going to make sure our voices aren't raised. And while this might seem, you know, restrictive to some people, I can't be myself, we need to have a professional way of communicating with each other. And understand that because people have different ways of communicating, that we have to respect that. And there are times that because of that, speak slower. I do not use jargon. I'm very careful not to raise my voice. The words that I use, I will think before I say the word, hey, that janitor needs to clean up more. Thinking that, oh, the word janitor probably will not be as well received as the word custodian, because I have to think about not myself, but the people that have to hear what I'm saying. So before you get to a situation where there's anger or a difficult topic, it is imperative to have an open line of communication. It is not the manager that can do that, I think, because everyone's just going to go, whatever you say. I think it really helps to have an outside person come in and talk about, how to communicate in the workforce, implicit bias in the workforce, dealing with staff who are different, dealing with customers who are different. And the more we understand that we come from different places and we communicate differently, the more we can respect the way that other people hear us.
Great.
But in looking,
yeah, that's a
good
one.
Yeah, and looking at the, it's the gossip part too, is that's, part of, we are in a professional workplace, and therefore we will act professionally too. And that is something that needs to be enforced not only by managers, but by fellow coworkers as well.
And of course, as always, if this is something that we hear a lot of our members want to know more about, it's something we can look into having a presentation on specifically. So always keep that in mind. And I don't have any other questions from anyone, unless anyone wants to hop on right now and ask their question. I'll give it a second here. But thank you, Nick. I really wanted to let you know how much we appreciate your time. Annie just put in her fine-free policy in the chat as well. I will be sharing out a folder to everyone that has all of these documents and things in. Feel free to add your own if you find something really neat that you think would benefit everyone. And I don't see any other questions coming in, so I guess we can end our conversation.
I'm just going to go ahead and, even though you might have it, I'm going to type in my email address. If anyone has any follow-up questions, they can certainly send them to you, but we're all colleagues, and what I find is what has always worked best is being able to communicate with each other. That's oftentimes the best way to resolve things that we're dealing with, and to at least know that other people are dealing with it too, no matter the size library or the type of library.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you so much again, and I hope everyone has a lovely weekend and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.